My name is Martha Meyer. I'm a children's librarian at the Evanston Public Library, and also I attend St. Luke's Episcopal Church, where I am on the Green Team.
My name is Sharon Smaller, and I'm a member of Beth Emmett, and I currently chair our climate action group, and it's called Dainu. So I'm talking today to Martha Meyer, very excited about doing this, and we're talking about specifically eating a plant-based diet. So Martha is someone really familiar with this and is going to talk about her experiences and why she's gotten involved with a plant-based diet. So Martha, can you tell us, why is a plant-based diet part of our discussion on climate change?
There are two main reasons. One reason is that eating something different for dinner is so much easier than many of the other changes that we have to make to mitigate climate change. So it's a good place to start. And animal agriculture may account for up to half of greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow. Can you explain how that can be?
Okay, well, first, I'm going to explain why I said easy. In 2017, a top environmental scientist, her name was Kimberly Nichols, she wrote an essay listing the four most impactful things that individuals and families can do for the planet. And it excludes advocacy, which is important for all of us to do, but it's not on that list. So she says, eat a plant-based diet, avoid flying, go car-free, and have fewer kids than you planned. At least from that perspective, changing what's for dinner is a lot easier than the other one. Why is animal agriculture so has such a strong effect on climate change? And it's because it's the source of a lot of things. It's the source of 80% of the world's deforestation. And we know trees capture carbon, and that is something very important. And then also, it's the leading cause of methane and nitrous oxide emissions. And those are way more powerful greenhouse gas emissions than CO2. They have a bigger effect. Like nitrous oxide is 300 times more powerful than CO2. So in fact, if cows alone, not chickens or pigs or sheep, but just cows, were a country, that country would rank third after the US and China in greenhouse gas emissions. The former chair of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's like the IPCC, which it issues all those dire warnings to us that then hit the news. He said, in terms of immediacy and feasibility, reduced meat consumption is the most attractive opportunity. Give up meat for a day initially and decrease it from there. So then, okay, so how much of an effect does it have? In 2006, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations said that animal agriculture contributed 14.5% annually to greenhouse gas emissions. And this was initially pretty shocking because that figure is more than the whole transportation sector combined, planes, trains, automobiles. That's huge. But then there were some scientists that began to realize that the Food and Agriculture Organization left out a lot of important calculations and may have been influenced by big agriculture. So then in 2008, World Watch recalculated and came up with animal agriculture contributing 51% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. Then two different UN organizations also endorse an increase, maybe not that increase, but an increase. So it's big in any case. Another way to think about this is that globally, humans use 59% of all the land capable of growing crops to grow food for livestock. So instead of growing the grain to feed the cattle, if we fed that grain that we grew directly to people, we could feed 4 billion more people. So food insecurity obviously is increasing because of the war in Ukraine and also because of climate change's effect on agriculture. So hunger is going to go up. So every bite of meat that we eat takes away a large serving of grain from a hungry person. It's because livestock farming is a very inefficient way to feed people. It's also not just land and grain that animal agriculture takes. It also takes 1/3 of all fresh water that humans use. It goes to livestock farming. And only 1/30 goes into people's homes. So if you really want to conserve water, if water is really important to you and you want to conserve it, then the best thing you can do is put down your hamburger. 70% of all antibiotics produced globally are used for livestock. So Jonathan Safran Foer, in his book, We Are the Weather, he says, we cannot keep the kinds of meals we have known and also keep the planet we have known. We have to either let some eating habits go or let the planet go. It is that straightforward and that fraught. And then he looks at you and says, where were you when you made your decision? So that's why we're talking about going plant-based. It has a lot of effect.
Can you describe what is a plant-based diet? Kind of clarify what that means.
Yeah, well, it's hard. A plant-based diet is just a diet that centers around plant foods. It is a really flexible term. It's defined by what you do eat, not by what you don't eat. There's lots of different gradations within this decision. That's the tricky part. You can base your meals on plants, and there's a lot of different ways to go about it. So here are some of the different flavors of plant-based, going from strictest to loosest. So the strictest one is called whole food plant-based. They always go together for that particular kind of eating. So when you eat plants that under that diet, you eat the whole seed or the whole fruit, not elements carved off of it. So like whole grains are whole, like oats, rather than white bread, which has had the wheat has had the bran and other nutrients stripped away. So or like the other thing that's really intense about whole food plant-based is you don't eat any oil. So you eat lots of seeds, fruit, vegetables, beans, tofu, whole grains, especially grains that have complete proteins, and nuts in moderation. That's whole food plant-based. So then there's another one that's called vegan. That means no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no honey. But it doesn't specify like that you have to keep things whole. It's not like that. But I would say a word about cheese, which is I think what many Americans would think about right away. Cheese is actually like really addictive, and it messes with your brain just like drugs do. You know, have you seen your brain on drugs? It's a sort of the same kind of thing. So it's really hard to give up cheese, but you can break the addiction. There is a whole book about it by Dr. Neal Barnard. He's the president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And the book is called The Cheese Trap. But if you can't break your addiction to cheese and you can't give up cheese, then be a vegetarian who aspires to be a vegan. Don't try to do it all at once either if you're a big cheese fan. Then there's an interesting hybrid one that was proposed by Mark Bittman, who is one of the great New York Times columnists about food. He calls it VB6. That's vegan before 6 p.m. That means 2/3 of your meals in a day are vegan. And then the other one, you eat meat. That actually helps the planet more than if you're 100% vegetarian, which is really hard to believe, but that's the research. Then there's vegetarian, which is just no meat, but you can eat eggs and dairy and cheese and all that. And then there's pescatarian, which is you don't eat meat except for fish. And then finally, there's flexitarians, where you eat meat, but you mostly eat it as a condiment, like the chicken broth in your soup or the few pieces of beef in your stir fry that, for flavor. So those are all the different gradations of how you could still go plant-based. You can call yourself a lot of different things. I would also add two different double Ds, I call it. You eat food with more diversity. So you try to eat 30 different plants a week. Other people say eat the rainbow when it comes to vegetables. And the other one is nutrient density. Eat foods with more nutrient density. And what is nutrient density? It means that for every ounce of food that you take in, there's a lot of the good stuff in food, like vitamins and minerals and phytochemicals and antioxidants. So greens like kale are the most nutrient dense things that you can eat, and beans and berries and nuts and seeds, and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, and whole grains and spices. Those are all nutrient dense. So however you decide to do this, whatever flavor you want to do, the important thing is how we treat God's creation, which also includes your own body. So here is the key to remember about all the changes that climate change is foisting upon us, things that we may not want to do, but we may feel like we need to do. You believe what you do. It's not so much the other way around. We think of it as, you do what you believe, but actually you believe what you do. So if you do something different, your mind will come along with you. the best example comes from religion. If you like an example of that kind of like do it physically first and then your mind will follow. The best example is from religion. And it's like, you get on your knees to pray. So kneeling actually creates a prayerful attitude over time. Even if you're feeling like rebellious and pissed off when you kneel down, it kind of helps you. That's the same thing that we would look at like food choices. Start somewhere, anywhere, and then let God's Spirit move you.
Okay. And I'm curious, where are you on the spectrum of different types of diets?
I'm a vegan that aspires to be whole food plant-based, but isn't. And I do occasionally have breaks where I'm not eating 100% vegan, but mostly I'm vegan. So every day is a new day. You start out new, you could do better the next day. So
Right, exactly. I'm wondering when you go to Wisconsin if you kind of trip yourself up and eat cheese there. 'Cause there's some good cheese.
I'm lucky because cheese was never something that I particularly liked. But I'll tell you more about some of the other foods that really do trip me up.
Okay, well, what was the trigger that made you do this?
Okay, it was not climate change at all. It was not on my radar when I decided to do this. I was in my late 40s and I fell in love.
What
Was
is the connection?
a new life with my husband Rick, and we wish that we had more life to spend with each other. So then, just after getting married, he left to take care of his dying father in the hospital in Florida. And in those long evenings, I read a book that someone at the Old South Branch Library had given me and said, "This changed my life." And it was called The China Study by T. Colin Campbell out of Cornell University. And it's about the surprising health benefits of going meat free and all his experiments over time that like led him to that. It's very, very science dense, but it kind of did it for me. So it was health that I did it for. So have a long life with my husband. I later also watched the Forks Over Knives video, which is much easier to take in than a long science book, and it covers a lot of the same territory. The other book that really floored me was written by a New York Times bestseller. He's a doctor. His name is Michael Greger, and it's called How Not to Die. And so between those two, they converted me.
Okay. Can you share with us some specific processes did you follow?
It was real easy for me to give up chicken meat because I hated chicken breast. It just seemed so boring, and I felt like I ate it all the time, and I was like, ick. So I'm glad I don't have to eat chicken breast anymore. But then, over time, slowly, I gave up different meats. And then I hit up against the roadblock, which for me was bacon. I could not give up bacon. But bacon was the thing for me. Other people, it would be something else. Offended vegan people when I told them I was a bacon vegan, but eventually bacon started to taste way too fatty, and I didn't want to eat it anymore, so I dropped it. But I took a long time where I was vegan except for bacon. So you can be vegan except for something else that you really have trouble giving up. The thing that really helped me give up bacon, though, is that it is now listed as a carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So it's like, okay, I'll give up bacon. So,
Okay. What other challenges did you come up against beyond bacon?
well, for everyone, I think the challenge to going plant-based is, what do I make? What tastes good? I want good food. So recipes I think, if you're going to do it, you kind of have to relearn what you're kind of doing automatically now when you're cooking dinner. So the best thing to do is just find one single recipe that you like. And then, you're started. It's a start. So I have a lot of recipe books to recommend. I'm a librarian. I love books. Isa Does It by Isa Chandra Moskovitz. She also wrote this wonderful book called Veganomicon, but it's a little bit more like gourmet. And Isa Does It is like, your regular, ordinary, everyday foods. And she's fabulous. And then there's a blogger named Angela Leiden, and she writes the Oshi Glows blog. Her cookbook is really fabulous, and there's some things in there that I just like crave, and it's so good. And then There's a book called East by Meera Soda. She's of Indian extraction. She has Indian cookbooks, but this one is broader than that. It includes lots of Asian food too. Sweet Potato Soul by Janae Claiborne. My husband is a Southerner, so we want to be able to eat some really good Southern food. And then any cookbook by Ottolenghi. He is a fabulous British chef of, I think, Israeli extraction, and his books are incredible vegetarian gourmet. Mostly not vegan because he uses a lot of yogurt. Anyway, if you're a gourmet cook and you don't want to give up gourmet cooking, there's this guy named Ottolenghi, and he's fantastic. So then there's a lot of books if you want to go the more strict whole food plant-based diet. You can watch Forks Over Knives video and go to the Forks Over Knives magazine and website. And then Dr. Greger, the one who wrote How Not to Die, he wrote a cookbook called How Not to Die Cookbook. And he also wrote a cookbook called How Not to Diet Cookbook. And then there's this cool new book out called Be a Plant-Based Woman Warrior. And it's written by Anne and Jane Esselstyn. They are the wife and daughter, respectively, of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who is from the Cleveland Clinic, and he's the expert on reversing heart disease with a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet. And then his son's name is Rip Esselstyn, and he has really great diet recommendations in his books. I think it's called the Engine 2 diet. It's designed for male firefighters to cook. So it's easy cooking and, real manly. Another obstacle that some people run up against besides recipes is their family, because you might want to go vegan, but you have a whole family to feed. So I was really lucky. My husband, who's the chef of the family, was willing to become a house vegan. And so he cooks vegan at home for us. But then when we go out, he's a meat eater.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids were preteens at the time. So they were already, they were used to a certain diet that I had served in the past. And I was divorced, so they traveled between my ex-husband and me. The rule was that if we went out, they could eat whatever they wanted. They could order whatever they wanted. But in my house, we ate vegan. And if they didn't like dinner, there wasn't anything else for dinner, but they could have as many healthy snacks as they wanted. So I made sure my house was full of healthy snacks. And if they didn't want to eat the dinner, they could just eat an apple and a lot of other things that they would, like. There's two things that are not challenges that most people think are going to be challenges. One is, how do you get your protein? That's what everyone always asks me. How do you get your protein? On average, Americans eat double the amount of protein they need. So any vegetable has some protein, but if you want that full feeling, a good hit of protein, beans and tofu and tempeh and grains that are complete proteins like quinoa. Also, to feel full, you load up on starches like corn and winter squash and white and sweet potatoes and, those things that are a little heavier. To make everyone feel better, maybe, the disease you get if you don't get enough protein is called kwashiorkor. Most people don't know anyone that has kwashiorkor because there's almost no one in the United States that has it. It is a very rare disease. It's present in areas where there's complete famine. So like if you go into an area where people are experiencing famine, some of the people may be suffering from kwashiorkor and they have ways to solve it. But there's almost no way that you could live in the United States and develop this illness. So it is not the big issue that everyone thinks it is. Put that worry aside. Okay. You don't need to worry about that. You will get the protein you need. Another big challenge that people think, especially if they happen to sometimes wander into Whole Foods, is that, oh my God, this is going to cost so much money. And cost doesn't have to be a challenge. The cheapest foods on the planet are dried beans and brown rice. You can, make 5 meals for, $1.68 or something. And if you want to really splurge and get a can of beans instead of getting them dry, so they're all ready to go, just ready to roast. I mean, that's about 75 cents at Walgreens, maybe you'll pay $1 at Whole Foods. And one of the very best vegetables to eat is red cabbage, which stores beautifully, so you can always get it. And you can make 2 or 3 huge bowls of cabbage slaw for like a whole bunch of meals. And that costs about $4. So if you're looking to eat things out of season, and almost all of us in Chicago have to do that in the winter, then fresh vegetables are expensive. But frozen fruit and vegetables are just as nutritious and healthy, and they are often cheaper. So don't get me wrong, you can spend oodles of money on fancy vegan food, but you don't need to. It can be a cheaper meal than eating meat.
Well, that's reassuring, especially in these kind of high inflationary times at the grocery store.
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
Can you talk about the difference this has made in your life? And I wonder how many years you've been eating a plant-based diet, and then just on every level, physically and spiritually.
Well, it depends on how long that bacon vegan section.
Well, we won't count the bacon.
Yeah.
We won't count the bacon. So,
Out like probably 2009, but I
okay.
probably wasn't technically a vegan in 2009. So it probably took me until about 2010 to become vegan. So a good portion of my life, I wasn't vegan. And what difference has it made in my life? From a health perspective, I'm 61 and so far, knock wood, no illnesses or diseases. And that is probably just dumb luck. But in the aggregate, if you put a whole bunch of plant-based people together, they are less likely to get cancer and heart disease and diabetes and a bunch of other diseases. In terms of emotionally, that's a kind of cool thing about a plant-based diet. Fruits and vegetables are apparently the things to eat if you want to reduce depression and stress. I wouldn't have expected that. That's not what I want to eat when I'm depressed and stressed. But if you eat fruits and vegetables, it will help reduce your depression and stress. I also supplement with omega-3 fatty acids, which is like the happy nutrient.
Mhm.
And if you want the research on the depression and plant-based eating, all the scientific research, you would go to How Not to Die by Michael Greger. He's really good. He'll give you the research on all the other stuff too. And then to answer your question about spiritually, I would say maybe I feel I have more energy to give back. Maybe I know I can listen better to God's call to do better. It goes back to the thing I was talking about before. So like, you believe what you do. So if you make a change, you can start being open. So I would never, I don't know that I would have been interested in changing my diet for climate change. But since I changed my diet for health, then I was really more open to seeing, oh, this is good for the planet too. And then you feel okay, you can read it, you're more open to it. So I feel like eating this way makes me feel more open to making other harder changes that we're called on to make based on the climate change that's sort of bearing down on us.
Hmm. That's really encouraging on so many levels. So you have the spirituality, you have the emotional gains, and then you have your physical health.
Yeah, it's good for
Pretty compelling.
it's good for everything.
Okay, so thinking about somebody trying to make this change in their lives, what are your top tips that you would offer to someone?
Okay, I have a bunch. So like strap yourself in here. I got a bunch of um first, you got to trust that your taste buds will change and develop over time based on what you are now eating. So you got to give yourself a lot of time to start loving it. It doesn't happen right away. It feels like a deprivation to begin with. But I absolutely promise you that after a while, you will start craving it and you will not believe that you didn't want it before because it becomes so compelling. So anyway, so there's a long period where it's like, wait, this doesn't taste good. And you also have to experiment endlessly with what satisfies you in terms of recipes. It's really hard to overhaul your eating that way, but you can trust that your taste buds are going to change. So what you first taste when you first start eating plant-based, it's not going to be like that forever. The biggest thing I'd say is like, don't make it all or nothing. Find just one recipe that is plant-based that you and your family like. Like, for example, cauliflower wings. You've heard of chicken wings. Well, there's such a thing as cauliflower wings now. So you can make it, but you can also buy it in downtown Evanston from this place called Elephant and Vine. I just adore it. I crave it. So, but you eat one meal and then you sort of congratulate yourself, and then look for one other recipe and start developing a repertoire over time. Give yourself some time. So then you do like a bunch of meatless Mondays because there are other people doing meatless Mondays. So then you can be in solidarity with people doing meatless Mondays. And then maybe you can add another day of the week and see how it goes. And I would say don't spend a lot of time on guilt. If you eat a meat-based meal at one meal, then the very next meal you can eat plant-based, you know. That's the best thing about plant-based eating. You can also eat a lot more food. So that's what I like. I'm especially if you skip or you limit your oil intake, it's amazing how much you can eat. Also, it takes your intestinal system a while to adjust to plant-based eating with all that added fiber. So you go slow and you let your body adjust to it. So that's one piece of advice. And a lot of people ask me, well, what do you do about a restaurant? And the first thing I would do is say, oh, you might want to cook more because you can limit salt, fat, and sugar. But if that's not your thing, there are plenty of restaurants that are either vegan, like Elephant and Vine, or have one or two entrees that can be made vegan or at least vegetarian. Most restaurants would like to serve a group of people, and usually in a group of people, one of them is plant-based. So you kind of have to have one entree that they can order. So usually there's one, not true in every restaurant. So the most important thing to do is to read the menu before you set foot in the restaurant, because it's way embarrassing to get up after you've seen the menu and say, oh, I can't eat anything here. So I look at restaurant menus before I go in. And the other key is that the easiest restaurants to go to are ethnic restaurants. So like Mexican, Indian, Thai, Chinese, Japanese, all those wonderful ethnic restaurants, different ethnicities, because their cuisine was being developed, there was less meat. So they have a lot of natural things that they serve naturally that are not based on meat. The hardest places to go are steakhouses and American restaurants because there's a lot less. You can usually find something, but it's less. Another big stumbling block people have is, a favorite meal that they've always loved. So like Thanksgiving turkey. A lot of people cannot imagine going without turkey at Thanksgiving. So just don't give up your Thanksgiving turkey. Just eat plant-based on non-holidays, and then you're mostly plant-based. You're having an effect as if you're 100% plant-based mostly. So another thing is like a favorite recipe that's made with meat. So, that's the other thing you could do is just make an exception for that recipe. Don't let one recipe or the thought of Thanksgiving meal with mom or your favorite children or whatever prevent you from, making the change. You can make the change, but just keep the things that are really important to you. But I would say it is really great fun to adapt a recipe that's a meat-based recipe into one that's not a meat-based. And a lot, there's loads of chefs that specialize in this. But for example, like my husband recently adapted Cincinnati chili, which is essentially a meat sauce. And he adapted it to be vegan, and it is so, so good. And it's better than the original. So if anyone loves Cincinnati chili, get in touch with
Have
me.
the little bit of cinnamon in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, lots of spices. It's so good. Yeah. So the other thing I would say is, and this is true for me, I don't know if it's going to be true for you, but this is my advice. Don't eat the highly processed food or vegan junk food. You will still be helping the planet. So that's great, but you may not be helping yourself. Like fake meat, fake cheese, vegan baked goods have their place. It works great in a restaurant if you want to be eating the same thing. Like if you all go out to a restaurant and you want to be able to eat the same burger that everyone else is eating, then, have your Impossible Burger. But generally it looks a lot like the meat or the, whatever food that you're used to, or cheese, but it doesn't taste like it. And so then you get sort of disappointed, and then you start craving the missing mouthfeel, the element that you're missing. So I find that it works better to do plant-based if it's really about finding a fabulous new way to eat that tastes better, it's easier to prepare, it's better for the planet, and it's thrilling most of the time. I mean, it's so cool. I just love eating.
Your enthusiasm, really, it knows no bounds. It's pretty. It sounds like when you sit down for a meal, it's like a really fantastic adventure.
Oh, my sister is a famous chef, and so I'm kind of like a foodie, kind of.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, I love food, and to me, this is more thrilling. I mean, as you get more adept at finding cool recipes and signing up for cool vegan meal plans and, all kinds of other fun stuff. It's like, wow, what can we get to eat tonight?
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you, why should a person of faith, consider doing this?
That's a really good question. All of creation is an icon of God, a reflection of God. The book of nature was given to all of us alongside the book of scripture to reveal God to us. So there's an organization that I'm learning from called Deep Green Faith, and they believe that the climate crisis is essentially a spiritual crisis. Because if we really understood the kinship that we have with fellow creatures, we could never destroy the earth on which we both depend. If you're Catholic, certainly the Pope has said something similar to this. And fixing spiritual crises is what churches and synagogues and mosques do. That's what religious institutions are about. So as religious institutions, we have a critical role to play in the climate crisis. We may not be the best at imitating the Sierra Club or the National Resources Defense Council, two great organizations, but we can lead the way in changing how folks view God's creation. Creation is not a resource. Creation is kin. A big change, and it's theologically, it goes back, into the Hebrew Bible. So let's say nature is not enough, not compelling enough to give up your steak. I have been in that boat in the past. What about vulnerable human beings? This year, because of the lifestyle that we here in the United States and in China have, our cars, our food choices, our energy and heating decisions, 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater for a good portion of this year. They are suffering because of our way of life. They contribute almost nothing compared to us to climate change. So one way of thinking about how can we be really responsible is we could each take in a homeless Pakistani family, but it would be even better if we prevented the next Pakistan. So Bangladesh is one of the countries that's about to, have lots and lots of flooding from oceans rising because of the warming planet. But also southern Louisiana is losing land like mad, and also Florida, and also the Pacific Island nations. They are all about to lose all of their land. And they're trying to decide how they can retain their culture when the land is gone. So we live in a miraculous time when every choice that we make can save lives. It's like we're each the hero of our Harry Potter novel or whatever fantasy novel that we read when we're young people. It's like we're the hero that can save the earth. In the US, we have the most climate power because we contribute the most or the second most to climate change. So every small decision that we Americans make can limit other countries' human suffering. So 3 times a day, we can make a better choice. Just remember what I said. You believe what you do. It's not the other way around. So do something different and your mind will follow.
Well, Martha, that was just so interesting and so inspirational. And I loved how you drew, sort of this factual landscape for us, but made it so personal and sprinkled with lots of your good humor.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to you about this. It was really fun.